Acts chapter 18. Paul in Corinth. After this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth, and he found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. And he went to see them, and because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them and worked, for they were tent makers by trade. And he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath, and tried to persuade the Jews and the Greeks. When Silas and Timothy arrived from Macedonia, Paul was occupied with the word, testifying to the Jews that Christ was Jesus. And when they opposed and reviled him, he shook out his garment and said to them, "Your blood be on your own heads. I am innocent. From now on I will go to the Gentiles." And he left there and went to the house of a man named Titus Justus, a worshipper of God. His house was next door to the synagogue. Crispus, the ruler of the synagogue, believed in the Lord, together with his entire household. And many of the Corinthians heard Paul believed and were baptized. And the Lord said to Paul one night in a vision, "Do not be afraid, but go on speaking, and do not be silent, for I am with you, and no one will attack you to harm you. For I have many in this city who are my people." And he stayed a year and 6 months, teaching the word of God among them. But when Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews made a united attack on Paul and brought him before the tribunal, saying, "This man is persuading people to worship God contrary to the law." But when Paul was about to open his mouth, Gallio said to the Jews, "If it were a matter of wrongdoing or vicious crime, O Jews, I would have reason to accept your complaint. But since it is a matter of questions about words and names in your own law, see to it yourselves. I refuse to be a judge of these things." And he drove them from the tribunal, and they all seized Sosthenes, the ruler of the synagogue, and beat him in front of the tribunal. But Gallio paid no attention to any of this. So, Paul in Corinth. Paul left Athens and met Aquila, a tent maker, whom he stayed with while reasoning with the Jews and Greeks. Paul was testifying, but the Jews reviled him, so he told them that he is now testifying to the Gentiles. And many people did believe, though, out of this, and they were baptized. And then the Lord said to Paul one night in a vision, to don't be afraid, and to keep speaking to the people. Now Paul was afraid because he was just going to get persecuted, but God was reassuring him, telling him, "No one will attack you to harm you. I have many in the city who are my people." And people did try and attack Paul and brought him before the tribunal. But the tribunal declared that this crime was not violent or vicious, and he refused to judge. And the tribunal said, "This is your own matter. You decide it your own way." So the people attacked the prosecutor, which was the synagogue leader. Now, I was confused when reading this for a second, because it says Crispus, the ruler of the synagogue, and then at the end it says Sosthenes, the ruler of the synagogue. But Crispus was converted to Christianity, so he was probably kicked out, and Sosthenes is probably his successor. Paul returns to Antioch. After this, Paul stayed many days longer, and he took leave of the brothers and set sail for Syria, and with him Priscilla and Aquila. At Cenchreae, he had his hair cut, for he was under a vow. And when they came to Ephesus, he left them there. But he himself went into the synagogue and reasoned with the Jews. And when they asked him to stay longer for a period, he declined. But on taking leave of them, he said, "I will return to you if God wills." And he set sail from Ephesus. When he had landed at Caesarea, he went up and greeted the church, and then went down to Antioch. After spending some time there, he departed and went from one place to the next, through the region of Galatia and Phrygia, strengthening all the disciples. So Paul set sail with Aquila and his wife, Priscilla, and Paul had his head shaved, and that's a Jewish tradition. When you finish a vow, you shave your head. Now, this was part of the Old Testament law, and some believe that Paul did this just to have a connection with the Jewish synagogues and to still be close. And then Paul reasoned in the synagogues, and the people asked him to stay, but he said, "I'll return if God wills." And then Paul sailed for Antioch and stayed there for some time. and then he strengthened the disciples, going place to place. Apollos speaks boldly in Ephesus. Now a Jew named Apollos, a native of Alexandria, came to Ephesus. He was an eloquent man, competent in the Scriptures. He had been instructed in the way of the Lord, and he had been fervent in the Spirit. He spoke and taught accurately things concerning Jesus, though he knew only the baptism of John. He began to speak boldly in the synagogue, but when Priscilla and Aquila heard him, they took him aside and explained to him the way of God more accurately. And when he wished to cross to Achaia, the brothers encouraged him and wrote to the disciples to welcome him. When he had arrived, he greatly helped those who through grace had believed, for he powerfully refuted the Jews in public, showing by the Scriptures that the Christ was Jesus. So Apollos was a very educated man, very eloquent in his words, and he was full of the Spirit, and he spoke all he knew about Jesus, but all he knew was the baptism of John. So Priscilla, which is the wife of Aquila, told him the more accurate truth about Jesus. And then he wished to go to Achaia, which they sent him off encouragingly and sent a letter to the disciples to welcome him. And Apollos made people believe and refuted the Jews by showing that Jesus was the Christ by using the Scriptures. So that is the end of Acts chapter 18. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe, and goodbye.